Hello, listener. I have a new features on the podcast. Now you can click on a link directly send me a message so that I can hear how has Beyondhood impact you? How does Beyondhood make you feel? It'd be lovely to hear and it's super easy. Go to the show notes above the description. There's a link. Say click here to direct message. Once you do that, it will directly link to your phone. And don't worry, I won't be able to see your phone number. I'll just receive the encouragement or comment from you. Looking forward to hear direct message from you all.
Childhood, adolescent, adulthood, and elderhood. Welcome to Beyondhood, where we go beyond elderhood, one chat at a time.
We're now on Patreon, a site where we provide rewards and perks to our subscriber, you. For as little as £3 per month, less than your cup of tea, you will get to see the exclusive Beyonders now and then picture. You walk around like a grown up without knowing you joined the most amazing and fun community to retrieve the ancient art of storytelling. Because stories shouldn't stop just because we have grown up. The Patreon site link will be on the show notes. Before we start, do you have one or all three of the following issues? First, do you want to know more and deeper into your loved one's childhood? Second, do you feel it is hard for you to talk to your loved one to understand them more deeply? They're often not as open with you because you're family or good friends. Or you find it hard to ask them questions because you're close to them. Third, have you thought of one day when they're gone, you can never ask them about their lives anymore? If any of the above comes to mind, our Record Life Story service is your solution. Listen to this episode and see how we can wave a story for your loved one and create this legacy for you and your loved ones. Contact me. My contact info is in the show notes. For today's episode 12, if you remember, I shared on season 1, in addition to our regular storytelling of a Beyonder, I also want to talk to experts in the arts of storytelling and keeping family legacy because Beyondhood is about using storytelling as a tool to connect different generations and to create family legacy by remembering the art and essence of what makes us human, the ability to communicate and share story. That's why this week I invited Angela, a photographer, an expert in photo organizing, and a family historian for her own family using photos. Without further ado, let's hear her stories. Hello, Angela. Nice to have you here on the Beyond Who podcast. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Nicole. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks. First of all, let's start with what's your name, where are you from, and where do you live? And what is your chronological age and what is your biological age, please?
All right. So, my name is Angela Andrieux, and I live near San Diego, California. It's a small suburb called Santee. It's in East County, San Diego. And I grew up in the central coast of California. Born and raised California, but I've had the privilege of living at many different places in the world. My chronological and biological age, so I am 46 years old. As far as my biological age, it depends on what day you ask me. Sometimes I think about it and I feel like I'm still in my 20s, and then other days I'm like I feel much older. So it depends kind of what's going on in the world around me, kind of how I feel that day.
That is actually a really good way to describe your biological age. Depends on what day you feel because sometimes we just feel more into outgoing, doing something, and sometimes we're more leaning toward resting. Really excited to have you on our podcast. And we are going to start going back into your childhood to understand your childhood with your family, and then we will go to your adolescence and then we'll bring you up to your adulthood which is where we're going to share with your photography career and how do you become the caretaker of your family history as well. And then finally, we're going to dive into your Beyondhood, where we're going to ask you to imagine what is it like when you're going to be older and what are some of your expectations and what will you imagine life would be like. So, where were you born and grew up? You mentioned earlier, but what was your childhood like? Can you share a story that defined who you were as a child with us?
I was born in San Luis Obispo, California, which is on the Central Coast, one of the most beautiful, best places in the world. And I'm very lucky to have spent a good chunk of my life there. I had an excellent childhood overall, fortunate to come from loving parents who, valued family time. For a good chunk of my childhood, I had grandparents that lived nearby, and I was a pretty happy kid. So, as far as a story that defines who I was as a child, best memories are family trips. And my grandparents owned a ranch that was about 5 minutes away from my house. Being able to kind of be a free range child and just have access to the outdoors and go play, those are the things that I think really define me, and being able to be not be so coddled and grow up in an area and in a time when a kid could just go wander. There's not a single story, but overarching feel of my childhood is the best way to encapsulate that.
Your memory as a child was being outdoors. So, how many siblings do you have, and what did your parents do?
So I have one brother. He's 7 years younger than me. He was very much wanted. He's actually adopted. My mom had trouble having more kids, and so they decided to adopt. By the time we got my brother, he was 7 years after me. So there's a pretty big age difference. I was little mama, and I absolutely adored my little brother and taking care of him. My parents owned their own business. They sold it a few years ago to their employees, but they ran a plastering contracting company for over 45 years on the Central Coast. And so they're very hardworking. And I got a huge amount of my work ethic and how to conduct myself in business from them.
I know that you mentioned you grew up was having a close relationship with one of your grandparents as well. Could you share a little bit with us about that and what was the relationship like?
Sure. So my grandparents, who lived about 5 minutes away, I spent a lot of time with them. So I would, on the weekends, I'd go spend a day or so at their house, and they just, it was just so much fun. They had this ranch up in the hills, and at one point, my grandfather had built me this fabulous tree house. So I remember going and playing in the tree house. My grandmother was very creative. She was an avid quilter among many other creative pursuits. And she taught me a lot of these different crafts as I went through adolescence and childhood. Those two things kind of really shaped a lot of who I am, and being able to have access to them on a very frequent basis was just really wonderful.
What particular did she teach you?
So she taught me how to sew, which I'm not great at, but I can do okay. She taught me how to crochet. She was the one that got me into paper crafting, which I did stamps and different kind of scrapbooking type style stuff. She's the first one that got me my first few things on that range. So she had this wonderful sewing room that had all of these different things. And I have the cabinets behind me that were in her sewing room. And I remember opening them up, and she just had these piles of fabric, all these different colors and textures. And I loved looking at them and have these like bins of buttons, and just being able to go in and touch and play with these things and experience them. It wasn't like she sat there and schoolmaster and teaching me something. It was just like I would watch and observe. And if I was interested, she'd be like, here, try it. And, she'd guide me, but it was very much like it was play. It was fun. It was never like something I had to do. I just totally wanted to.
Oh, wow. So, how would you describe that relationship with your grandma? Is it something that it carry on into going to have your creative side into your adulthood?
Absolutely. I was fortunate. My All of my grandparents lived into my adulthood. This particular set of grandparents, I lost in the last decade, but I was fortunate to be able to get to know them as an adult. Grandma, we became friends. And that was kind of a really cool transition to I was her granddaughter, somebody that she'd guide, but also somebody I would call in. We'd talk about movies, we'd talk about different books we were reading, we'd chat about life, and she was my friend. So when I lost her, it was devastating. But I'm really fortunate that I have so many wonderful memories, and I inherited a lot of things that are in my house that are reminders of her every day. And it's to a point, it's been enough years to where when I think of her, I don't cry. I think of her and I smile and I remember all of the beautiful times that we have. I still miss her desperately, but it's that grief has mellowed.
That's really wonderful to hear when you speak how you were her grandchild. But then as you go into your adulthood, you guys become friends. And I think that's one of the most beautiful things about grandchild grandmother relationship is that eventually you go through from family into friendship as well.
Yeah.
And we are going to talk about a little bit about your friends. Do you remember who was your childhood best friend and how did you guys meet and what were some of the games or adventure you guys share as child?
My childhood friend was kind of more towards adolescence. Got to know her in middle school. And we'd crossed paths many times early in our lives, but we really got to know each other. We were in the same youth group at church, and we were both musical. She was homeschooled. I was going to a small private school, and our music groups for a band and would often get together. And so we'd perform together and see each other at church. And we did preteen, teenager things that girls do. We just played with makeup and did our hair and talked about boys. And we had so much fun. And she and I are still friends today. Now, I don't see or talk to her very often. She lives in France. So the last time I saw her was probably about 5 years ago. But we still keep in touch every now and again. And I still consider her one of my closest friends and know that she's someone that I can pick up with where we left off. And we're going to carry forward. And I think that's one of those amazing friendships that stands the test of time.
That's a really good way to transition to your adolescence about what was it like in school? Did you enjoy school? Or what was your most adventurous or rebellious thing you have ever done?
So I was a good girl. I didn't really act out all that much. I was very driven academically. I enjoyed learning. As far as things that I loved at school was music. I was very involved in the music programs. I played in the band, and when there were orchestra activities, things like that, I would do that. School itself was challenging. I was one of those kids who wished I had been homeschooled, struggled with other kids. Not that I get in fights or anything. I just kind of didn't identify. The social aspects of school were challenging. So I was much happier when I was with a smaller group of people that I was closer to. So I would say I enjoyed learning, but I didn't really enjoy school.
Interesting, you touch base on homeschool. And for those of the audience might not know, so in the US, is it any parent can bring their kid to homeschool? Is there a requirement to send them to school?
I think it depends on the different states. And it certainly was a little bit more lax when I was a child than it is now.
I looked it up at State Policy Now. Homeschooling is legal in all 50 states, but each state has different homeschool laws that regulate how parents can homeschool their children. Some states have very restrictive homeschooling rules, such as subject, reporting, and testing requirements, while other states are more relaxed. Interesting thing to learn about. What was your favorite movie or book as a teenager? When did you see it? And do you remember what was it like? Why do you love it? And do you still love it?
So, this is a really interesting question. I had to think about it for a while because when I was a kid and especially into adolescence, I did love to read. And I read a lot of historical fiction. And that was probably is and still is my favorite genre is historical fiction. One of the series that I really loved was the Anne of Green Gables and Anne of Avonlea books and movies. Especially as like a preteen and early teenager, those were some of my absolute favorites, and I still love them today. It's such a good, wholesome story, and it just kind of takes you back in time and brings it back to so many of the things that we deal with now are constant, but it puts it into a wholesome way that is just in a story that's just so absolutely endearing.
For those of you who don't know, Anne of Green Gables is a 1908 novel by a Canadian author. Written for all ages, it has been considered a classic children's novel since the mid 20th century. Set in the late 19th century, the novel recounts the adventure of a 11 years old orphaned girl, Anne Shelley, sent by mistake to two middle-aged siblings who had originally intended to adopt a boy to help them on their farm in the fictional town in Canada. The novels recount how Anne made her way through life with the siblings in school and within the town.
Watched a ton of Star Trek as a kid. It was one of those things that my dad and I bonded on. I remember when I get home from school, he'd come in from the office because their office was at our home. And at like 4 o'clock every afternoon, we'd watch Star Trek. It was a rerun on TV. I love Star Trek still to this.
I love the story about how a movie connected you and your family with your dad. That I would also want to ask you, what was the most important historical event that you remember? And how did you feel about at that time and why was it so important to you?
I do really remember when Mount St. Helens erupted. That was in 1980. I was only 2, maybe 3 years old. I was very young, but I do remember it. And I remember my mom getting me books at the library. It actually was probably the start of my fascination with geology. Now, I've never really studied it other than a single course in college, but it's something that I've always found very interesting. The death of Princess Diana was pretty shocking early in college, and just, she was such a figure in the world, and to have her gone all of a sudden was very jarring. And one of my aunts was very very in tune with her, and it hit her really really hard. So it makes you take a different look at it, and how people attached to different celebrity figureheads in the world, the ripples that her loss caused across multiple countries and around the world. So those are kind of the things that really stood out to me when I look back at some of the big things. The one that really pops out to me is 9/11, but that was early in my adulthood. And that's probably one of the most pivotal for me. My then boyfriend, now husband, had just joined the military. He was away at boot camp. I was a young professional, and it was completely jarring what that did to our world. So that, I would say, like, as far as big historical events, was probably the most impactful.
Yeah, I remember 9/11. I was a early teenager and until this day I still remember the moment I watched it on TV and saw the whole building collapse. That memory and that feeling, like you and I, we still remember what happened and how does it impact our life. And now we're going to go into your adulthood, which is one of the most exciting thing I would like to talk to you about because that's how we connected. First of all, why did you choose photography as your career? And can you share with us how did it happen and what have you been doing with photography?
My career path is quite interesting. I started out, so I majored in college in finance. So about as far from photography as you can get. I worked in the financial field for several years, and then early on in my marriage, my husband, who was in the US Navy, we were stationed in Sicily. And just a little bit before that, he had bought me my first DSLR camera, and I had been starting to learn how to use it and was kind of dabbling with photography, wasn't serious about it. And then we moved to Italy. And while we were there, we're in this beautiful place surrounded by all of this history and texture and color and all of these wondrous things that were all very new to me. And I just dove into photography. And so I started capturing everything with my camera and then doing better at learning how to use it. There on the base that we were stationed, we formed a camera club. And that's really where I learned how to use my camera. So we did different exercises to understand what aperture and ISO and shutter speeds were all about. Those are things that I'd read in my manual, but it just hadn't clicked as to what they meant. And so having this community to kind of come together and everyone loved this same art form, I was able to learn, and all of a sudden the light came on and I was like, oh, this is awesome. And from there, I started reading blogs, which were very, very prevalent at that point. Podcasting was brand new, but I started listening to podcasts and just basically absorbing everything I could with relation to photography. After 4 years in Italy, by the time we came back, I wasn't really so interested in working in finance anymore. And I decided to, hang out my shingle, so to say, is that I'm a photographer. What I really loved is doing fine art photography, basically creating beautiful pictures that people would hopefully want to put up on their walls. The problem with that is there's a lot of people who do that, and it's a very, very tough market. So what I kind of evolved into was photography education. Through all of this time, from when we moved to Sicily and forward, I've had a photography blog and I've done my own writing. And initially was just anecdotes from our travels and living overseas. And it evolved into talking about photography, how I was using photography, how I was using different photography software. And I started writing tutorials and working with other photography software companies. I became an affiliate. So I started getting into affiliate marketing and promoting products that I used and loved. And from there, I actually got noticed by a couple of these companies and was invited to work with them part time. And then that turned into full time work. And then that's led kind of to where I am today, working with another photography software company doing product evangelism. So I do everything from writing technical documentation to doing live streams and webinars and teaching people how to be successful with that software. So it's kind of a interesting journey to get to where I am today with photography. In addition to the work that I do with photography software today, I am active in my local camera club. I think that that's really important for people who are creative to be able to have access to people who have similar creative pursuits. And it's a great way to make friends and be social and connect. So, I mean, it's a lot of fun. And there's so many different facets to it that I think if somebody's interested in photography and being creative, there's many ways to do it.
I particularly want to focus on how did you use photography to capture your family memory? You mentioned to me about the Halloween picture of your grandmom and also the story of your grandfather in the Navy. Could you share a little bit about that with us?
Absolutely. So, the company that I work for is called Mylio Photos. And one of the things this software is really great at is helping you organize your lifetime of memories. And this has started me on a journey of scanning in old family photos, going through old photo albums. I'm currently working through some of my grandmother's photo albums, getting all of those pictures scanned. And as I'm doing that, I'm discovering different stories about my parents, my grandparents, and sometimes even great grandparents. That's kind of where all of that's come from, is being able to go in and collect those and become the historian for my family.
Mylio, which is the company that Angela worked for, it is a photo software company. It helps you to organize and search all of your media in one place. It truly helps you to rediscover your memories. You can go to mylio.com, mylio.com to try it out for free. And if you want to purchase, Mylio and I have partnered up. And if you put Beyondhood as your promo code when you check out, you will get 15% off. I'll put this on the show note as well.
The Halloween picture you mentioned is from one of my grandmother's photo albums. And it's just one of those funny things. So my grandfather was a colonel in the Marine Corps. He was a pretty stoic guy, but had a soft spot for all of the women in his life. He had 5 daughters and my grandmother's beautiful woman. And so he loved his ladies. And so he had this very jovial side too, and very proper, very a Marine. There's a certain thing when you think about United States Marine, they're very stoic and proper. And then I'm looking through these pictures and a lot of them are him. There's many in uniform. There's many of him with different people in his life. And then I come across this picture of him that looks like something out of Game of Thrones. And he's in this like fur kind of cloak thing. I think he had a crown on his head. And I'm not sure if it was my mom or a couple of my aunts that were in the picture with him, but it was obviously Halloween. And I'm just going, what on earth was going on there? And I still need to ask my grandma about it, but it's one of those funny pictures that I look at and I'm just going to have this one image of a person of being this professional and military and that military bearing. And then you see them dressed up for Halloween. And it's just the two sides of the same person. And it just gives you an entirely different glimpse into the people that came before you.
Wow, so what year was that about? Like in the 1940, 50? Or what
That
was
was
it?
probably, I think, in the 50s. I'm going to guess in the 50s. I'd have to go back and look at the
Mm.
picture. A lot of them had dates or date ranges on the back. As I go through these photo albums, I'm pretty fortunate there's a lot of extra information that my grandma hand wrote on the back of them or sometimes in the margins of the pictures. Plus, my grandmother is still living. So I can ask her. And a lot of times it's really cool. I can actually text her. I can send her the picture and I can ask her for the story. She'll text it to me back and then I can go ahead and screenshot that. And then I have that story that I can go ahead and save in that way as well.
What would they dress up as?
That's a really good question. I think my mom, my auntie were dressed up like princess. And then here's my grandfather, like I said, in the fur cloak, and he had a crown on his head, and like it looked like something out of Game of Thrones. And it was just kind of wacky and such a fun contradiction to his normal Marine Corps military bearing type photos where he was always looking very proper, to here's this fun, loving dad doing crazy things with his daughters, and just being able to see that side of him was really cool.
Family pictures sometimes it's about seeing another side of the person compared to their normal routine.
Exactly.
When you were going through all this picture, are there anyone maybe from your great grandparent or your parent that you remember very vividly as well? And how does it create a relationship in your head to what they are like nowadays?
You can see their personalities in their younger pictures. Grandmother is and always has been very proper and very pragmatic person. You know, she had to raise 5 daughters. Her husband was in the military. He was gone a lot. So she's a pretty strong woman and very much, most of the time, no nonsense. But every now and again, her playful and her silly side would come out, and you'd see the laughter and those big smiles. The other things that I would notice was the relationship between my grandmother and grandfather. Like any married couple, I'm sure they had their challenges, but in the pictures, you can tell that they really loved each other. Like close, the way they look at each other, you can see that there was a kindness and a love there that I think not a lot of people are fortunate to have. And to see that come through in the photos throughout the years, even though knowing that, they're human and they had challenges like anybody else, that was always what things came back to, was family.
You now using picture as a family legacy caretaker. How do you see that role and what makes you so enjoyable doing it as well?
Well, you get to learn things about the people who came before you that you didn't know, and it gives you a glimpse into their lives and why they are who they are now, or maybe as you knew them. But as far as the role, I take it pretty seriously because it's preserving the family history for the next generation. So whoever comes past me, I'm able to go through and gather details before they're gone, before they're forgotten, add that to the database of images, and that stuff can carry forward. And the people who come after me can go, that was Grandma Bertha, or that was Uncle Bruce. And they know who these people are in the pictures, even though they're long gone. And the people who directly knew them might be long gone. Those details are preserved. And then that family history, that story is also preserved.
Beautiful how you describe it. Keeping the family alive and continue and passing on to the next generation.
Yep.
On that point, I understand you are also a military spouse, as you mentioned earlier, and your grandma was also one. What was it like to share that connection with your grandma, and how was it different? Do you guys talk about it, or what are some of the difference and similarity that you guys share?
We have talked about it quite a lot, and it's been one of the things that we've bonded over, because there are some things that only she and I understand that the rest of the family, while they're sympathetic to, having a spouse gone and deployed for a significant length of time, until you experience it, it's really hard for other people to fully understand and grasp what that's like. Now, she was raising 5 daughters and doing that. I don't have kids, so that makes a difference. The way technology is, towards the end of my husband's career, we could talk almost every day, depending on operational security. If there was something going on, sometimes there are days we couldn't talk, but it was very easy. I compared that to early in his career. The internet technology was not nearly as advanced, and it was very expensive for us to talk. And we would talk maybe once a week, every couple of weeks, and we would rely more on letters. And then you contrast that back to my grandmother's time, where phone calls were probably not going to be happening from across the world. And you really relied on letters and slow mail carriers to get that communication back and forth. So being able to, the way we communicate with our spouses on deployment is so very different. And it's been very interesting to compare and contrast that with her. And then some of the differences we've had with moving from different places, the relationship between her and my grandfather, from what I understand, is my grandfather would come home and say, okay, we're moving. This is where we're going. And she'd pack up the kids and they'd go. Whereas with my husband and I, our relationship is different. Times are different. My husband would come home and say, hey, here's our options. I only have so much say in this, but do you have an opinion? And those differences in the generations, I think it's very interesting how relationships have evolved over the years. So there's a lot of things we can compare and contrast. Some of the things that are similar are the little tags that the movers put on your furniture every time you move. We've been in this house now for I think about 6 years. I'm still finding things that have those tags. And some of them have tags on them from 2 or 3 moves ago. And then as I was going through some other stuff, I noticed I had this old trunk that was my great grandparents when they immigrated from Switzerland. And that trunk then got stamped with my grandfather when he was in the military. It has his emblem on there. And there's one of those moving stickers on the back of it from them.
Explain a little bit more. So what are these tags for? So is it
So
for
it's-
military or what is it?
Well, it seems like it's something that any movers would use, but I've only really seen people who are in the military have these stickers everywhere. So you go through as they're loading up your boxes, they do an inventory and they put a sticker on things with a number. And then they have a list and they have the number and then they notate housewares or clothing or in the box. So that way when they're unpacking, they know what part of the house to put the boxes in. The military often moves so frequently. We have a lot of these stickers and we never fully get rid of them. And just to find one on my grandpa's trunk that's really, really old, it's one of those kind of funny similarities that just so much changes with culture, but so many little things also stay the same.
Wow, the way you describe about your relationship with your grandma and how you can see from the picture in the 50s that all the way to still having proof of your physical thing to remind you with them.
My grandfather was the one in the military. My grandmother, she is still alive and she's 97.
What is your relationship with her now?
I try to see her about once a month. She lives here in town, so her health is not as good as it used to be. We'll get together and have lunch where she lives and chat. And every now and again, if my aunts aren't available, maybe I can run her to a doctor's appointment. And it's just very comfortable. I love having her close by and knowing that she's there, and she's just a sweetheart.
Do you show some of this picture to her or any other picture that you found and what are
Oh,
her
absolutely.
comments?
Absolutely. Yeah. I occasionally will text her. Even though she's 97, her mind is sharp. She's probably sharper than the rest of us in the family combined. And I can text her a picture and she will come back and she'll tell me a story that's associated with that picture in the text message. So that's actually a really cool tip for anybody who's working with another family member. If you can share that picture and get them to send you the story back, you can save that, you can screenshot it, and then you can put that into your digital album. So you preserve that in their words, which is really cool.
Do you guys also do video or mostly pictures?
So I have video as well. And my software also can hold video files too. So if we do video, we can do that. Or if I did like a FaceTime and I recorded it, we could certainly put those in there too. We don't do very often, but maybe we should.
How you say when you share the picture with her, she return you with a story. And that's the beauty of using different tools, no matter is it a audio recording like us or photography like you, then the story is what come back, and that's the important thing. And that's why we use the tool to create that sensation for it to come. That's a really lovely point to move into the last part of our podcast. It's about beyondhood. We said beyond elderhood here. I want to ask you to imagine yourself in your elderhood. What would you be most looking forward to? And what do you think you would be like?
I think one of the things I'm most looking forward to is pursue things that I'm passionate about, whether that's photography, creative things, general learning. And I hope that as I get older, I don't lose that sense of wonder and that sense of creativity that has been part of my life. I want to always keep learning and growing. One of the things that I've struggled with is caring too much about what other people think. And I've always been, even as somebody who I didn't really know and somebody that I maybe even didn't really respect, I still wanted them to like me. And I find the older I get, the more I'm like, you know what? I don't care. It doesn't matter if this person over here, who I don't even happen to like, perhaps, what they think of me doesn't matter. And the older I get, being more okay with myself and caring less about what others think is so freeing. And I hopefully grow into and continue to grow being happy and pragmatic about the challenges that I face and feeling like I've filled my time well. So that's kind of what I envision for the rest of my life.
Well, I hope in maybe 30 years you listen back to this podcast and then you will see if you are doing what you said.
That'd be pretty cool.
Why we do the recording, because you can listen back into it in the future. Final question is, what is your all-time favorite family story from all the photography that you have seen?
That's a hard question because there's just so many.
Or what's your most memorable?
First one is there's a picture of my parents. I would say they're probably in the early 20s. And they're, I think, at like a wax museum where they have the statues of different popular people, and they were next to Spock. So Leonard Nimoy as Spock in Star Trek uniform. And here's both my parents in their 20s and just grinning from ear to ear next to this wax figurine. And it's just such a fun reminder of how that bit of pop culture has been something that a love of that has been passed down through the generations from my parents to me. And actually my husband loves it too, which is really cool. Another one or series of images that my mom had on the wall were of my paternal grandparents. My grandfather raced cars when he was younger. And so seeing him next to his race car, those are really cool. And then there's a picture of my grandmother, and she's probably maybe 18 years old. And she's got her dress, she's pulled it up a little bit over her knee, and she's just looking all cute and like being naughty. And it's just one of those pictures that I absolutely love.
Why do you like using photography as a creative way to create your family story?
Well, I mean, photos are moments in time. And when we go through and we capture these moments, it freezes that into a place that you can always go back and look at it. So it's a great way to see how your life has been blessed, how your family's life has been blessed. Everyone goes through hard times, and there may be really hard times coming in the future for some people. And being able to look back at those memories and see those moments where people are smiling, people are happy, and you see their love for one another, I think is really powerful and can help shape us and keep us positive as we move forward.
How do you feel about recording your life story and having the opportunity to talk about what are you imagine for your Beyondhood?
You know, it's a very interesting experience, and it's caused me to pause and consider a lot of different things. So when you sent me over the list of questions, I went through them and spent a lot of time considering each one and how I'd want to answer it and how I'd want those things to be preserved. So it's been a very interesting experience. I really enjoyed it. It's brought back some memories that I hadn't really thought of in a while. And it's really kind of crystallized how I want my future to be, because I've had to sit here and consider that and come up with an answer of, okay, what do you want the next 30 years to look like? And I've really appreciated that opportunity.
What is a piece of advice or question for our older generation that you have?
Well, so it's kind of a request. I would like to request the older generation tell it like it is. Don't be afraid of the younger generation always having all of these new ideas. Just be pragmatic. Tell us what to expect, the good and the bad, and what it's like to age. Also, if you see me missing an opportunity or there's an opportunity in front of me that I'm hesitating to grab, don't be afraid to tell me to grab it. Give me the wisdom that you have with your experience, share that with me, and that my generation and younger absolutely needs that from the older generation. And hopefully the younger generation can respect that those that came before us maybe know something that we don't know. That's a really important thing. And hopefully those who are older than me and a little bit wiser than me can share their knowledge.
And that's why we test and storytelling as a tool to connect the different generation. Instead of just telling us what to do, is sharing their knowledge and experience through storytelling. Thank you. Thank you. Before you leave, if you love this episode, please stay tuned for our next one. If you haven't done so, please follow Beyondhood in your favorite podcast listening app. Or you can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you found this conversation inspirational or interesting or valuable, chances are you did, since you're still listening. Would you do me a personal favor, a 6-second favor? Share it on your social, email, or tell a friend. Tell a person you know who can benefit from this conversation, who you think will be inspired by our Beyonder, who is navigating how to age with grace and motivation so that they can join and be part of our mission. You guys can discuss. When a podcast becomes a chat becomes an action. Then we're closer to create a community where we go beyond elderhood, one story at a time.
Childhood, adolescent, adulthood, and